Hi folks, welcome to Scholar About Tarot. Just call me Mayfield, and thanks a ton for stopping by the study space. You might actually notice that we're actually seeing the top of my bookcase. That's because I'm way too old to be crisscross applesaucing it on the floor, so I'm in a chair now. But hey, at least you can see some of the visuals, some of the decks that I'm going to show off a little bit later. And the reason why I'm going to do that is because I want to talk to you guys a little bit about AI art in tarot. It's been a while since there has been really any conversation about AI art in tarot specifically. AI art, AI voices, and ChatGPT, that is still in the conversation on social media, but the conversation has dwindled down just a little bit, and that is maybe a tad concerning for me, but I guess let's just kind of go in and get started. As you can tell, this video is actually unscripted. I did have another version of this video that was scripted, but I kind of didn't like it. I sounded super constipated the entire time, and so I wanted to try something a little different. I do, however, have an outline, so I still have my notes. There's no shortage right now of campaigns, pre-orders, anything like that, that are well-funded and AI generated. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that because I've noticed recently that it is very obvious that there is still this stigma against AI art, and I do want to keep that stigma alive for now, for reasons that I will tell you guys a little bit later. Now, like, AI art is getting a tad more sophisticated to the point where it's a little difficult for us to pinpoint what is an AI generated deck and what isn't. And there's also this hesitancy for people who create AI generated decks to specify that it is indeed an AI generated deck. As I was browsing on Kickstarter, as one does, I did notice a couple of AI decks that it took me way too long for me to find out that they were AI generated. And there are also like workarounds where there are these authors who try to pitch their deck as, I don't know, like, I'm paraphrasing here, but like a collaboration between human and technology. You know what I mean? So yeah, I just wanted to address that because it's getting a little hard to identify when a deck is ethically created or not. And even then, like, we could argue about what does it mean for it to be ethically made, but I don't know. Like, maybe it doesn't matter, because in some ways, like, tarot is a form of technology, and what does it matter if it's AI generated or not? I guess technically it doesn't, but it really matters to me, which is why I'm gonna give you 3 reasons as to why I don't see myself purchasing AI generated tarot decks anytime soon, if at all. And after that, I'm gonna give you guys a couple of tarot decks that I think are good alternatives for AI generated art, and maybe you have some ideas on some good alternatives as well. But let's go ahead and get started. Let me get my notes. I'm gonna try to make this as like not rambly as possible. If you guys have seen any of my other unscripted work, you know that's gonna be really hard. So first and foremost, there's an ethical reason why I'm not interested in AI generated tarot decks. And just as I said before, what does it really mean for it to be ethical? Well, in my opinion right now, there's no ethical way to consume these kinds of products, for the reason that it still runs the risk of stealing other artists' artwork. And that's just a no for me. I think my favorite demonstration of this was perhaps this example that I've seen a couple of times in different videos when AI was, you know, talk of the town. It was an image, an AI generated image, where you could still see remnants of the artist's signature. like the original artist's signature who did not consent for their work to be used in this way. I want to be upfront and totally just take a moment to say that I understand that people who create these AI generated tarot decks probably don't intend to steal anybody's art, but at this point, since that's kind of part of what makes it generated, I mean, intention doesn't really matter at this point. Because of that, I'm just taking my own precautions in deciding not to indulge in purchasing any of these decks, especially when there are no legal precautions in place. I think as of this recording, the only place that I know is like has like any kind of measures to limit the use of unauthorized AI generated images is the EU. No word on the US or Canada. And I think it's just my opinion, but I think it's mainly because no one really knows what to make of AI generated images or AI generated anything really, especially when it doesn't really serve their political endeavors. Anyways, so for the sake of argument, would I purchase an AI generated tarot deck if I knew that there were precautions in place and that it refrains from stealing other illustrations? Will I reconsider that? This is gonna sound really bad, but it depends on how hard the author is willing to work or what labor was put into this creation. Like, I understand that people who typed in a prompt like feel some kind of ownership over what they have created, but that deck didn't really take much labor to make. All you had to do was really type in a prompt. I think personally, if that scenario were to be a reality, I would maybe not spend any more than like $25 on that deck. And that's assuming that the author put in like a decent amount of work into creating like an extensive guidebook to help figure out like what's going on in each card, because a lot of the times it's like kind of randomized, right? Even then, however, that $25 could easily just go towards a tarot deck that was created, through human illustration. So that leads me to my personal reason for not being interested in purchasing AI generated tarot decks anytime soon. At the end of the day, I do value human art, and I place more value in human art than I would in anything that was created by artificial intelligence. I think the reason why I kind of realized that is, well, not so much of a realization. I finally had the language to be able to pinpoint why I preferred human-made art than AI-generated art. And this is from YouTuber and animator Aaron Hansen from the Game Grumps. He tweeted this really excellent tweet about, it was actually a huge thread. He basically said, it's okay to just value human art. There's nothing wrong with that, because at some point, AI generated art isn't really going to look all that different from something that could have been human made. If you remember back in the AI art hype where people were just putting prompts together and seeing what they get, I mean, you would get these like some of these monstrosities, these Be Not Afraid-esque images where the hands are wonky, the eyes looked a little strange. There were just so many inconsistencies with what you were looking at. But now, I feel like it's been, I don't know how long it's been. I want to say it's been like 5 months since the craze. But now, there's just so much. All you can really rely on to identify if an image is like AI generated is like maybe wonky lighting and just these little things that don't look quite right or don't look quite completed. And that's like your best guess And it just sucks to have to play I Spy and Detective in each piece of art that you see, especially when you're browsing Kickstarter, because that's honestly like how I've been trying to determine sometimes if in a deck is AI generated. I have to really like look at it and stare at every single nook and cranny to make sure that it's not AI generated if it's not already specified in it somewhere in the campaign. I will say, however, that I think AI generated art is kind of losing steam just a little bit. More recently, Winslow Dumaine did do this interview where he discussed AI art, and I really appreciate him for saying that, he does consider AI art to still be art, but he has the opinion that it's boring art. And I have to agree with him, and it's kind of showing right now, like on Twitter. Like if you're on the thirstier side of weeb Twitter, you will see the same, like, well, I mean, obviously you'll see different anime characters, but you'll see like this, like some rendition of an anime chick in the same pose with some of the same like weirdness that happens, like weirdly shaped armpit or weird lighting. But it's the same like image essentially over and over again, just with like a different character. And supposedly art is additionally losing a lot of its luster because now it is merging with other AI generated images, which I think is hilarious. AI art is doing an incest with itself, and it's creating really, it's going back to like Be Not Afraid-esque levels of art sometimes. And I just think that's really funny. And I made sure to link all of these tweets and interviews like in the description below. In the context of tarot specifically, I just prefer an artist's own rendition and interpretation of what they see in each card. A lot of the times, like, this is really hard labor, and I want that often unpaid labor to go and acknowledged. And honestly, I'm not even sure if I want like an AI generated work or an AI generated tarot deck that had like human made tweaks, because at the end of the day, like that was just a deck that needed modifications to it. You are fixing the generated work's mistakes, and at some point, well, I know I just said that AI art is getting weird, right? Weird again, but there is still that looming possibility that at some point the AI generated work is going to get a little bit better. The technology is going to improve. I do genuinely think that at some point we're also going to see perhaps like AI generated decks in mass market, mainly because publishers will only need to pay an author and not an artist. I kind of had that realization from two different sources. Of course, there's speculative, and this is perhaps hypothetical, but I do see little bits here and there of that maybe happening. I recently watched an unfortunately patron-only video from Natalie Wynn of ContraPoints, where she discussed AI art and maintained like a really good sense of skepticism in the more doomsday aspect of it. However, she did discuss what that could mean for like company logos, some of the more mundane bit of work that we kind of take for granted, like, I don't know, pop art or stock images, even like the little blurbs or descriptions that you would see on shopping sites, thereby relinquishing some of those paid jobs to AI generated work instead. And the second thing that sort of confirmed this for me was a deck that's currently on pre-order from Llewellyn called the Invisible Tarot. And so the Invisible Tarot, when I was reading through it, like I saw the image first, of course. It's just a blank deck. And so I clicked on it and I'm looking at the description, and it says, look into the card and you can intuitively gain your reading from that. That's what it said when I first saw it on pre-order. Now it's still on pre-order, but now it says, you can create your own cards, which is not on the description like beforehand. You can take what I'm saying with a grain of salt because once again, I wasn't smart enough to screenshot this. But considering that this deck is called the Invisible Tarot, I'm pretty sure the intention of this deck was for it to be so minimalist that you would need to just stare at the blank canvas. But at any rate, that tells me that publishers have no problem with axing an artist in favor of perhaps saving a little bit of labor. And I'm not saying that the Invisible Tarot might not have its merits for some people who would like to have that exercise in intuition, but at the end of the day, these decks are mass-produced consumables that we are meant to spend a lot of money on. So let's discuss the aesthetic reason for why I'm not a fan of AI-generated art. And this reason is more so relevant to tarot. A lot of them, especially at first, they seemed kind of like a really dark Baroque. Also, it's just like empty and uncanny and just weird to stare at. Like I know that's like a more of a feature than a bug for a lot of people who want to indulge in these decks for either dream work or shadow work, but that's, I don't know, it's just not good to look at. I think what would be a lot more compelling in the way that AI art is generated at this point is maybe something more photorealistic, like liminal spaces. Somebody get on a liminal space deck, that'd be great. Don't do AI for it though, that'd be terrible. Specifically in the context of dream work though, I think that there are so many better options for that, and I'll show you a couple in a little bit. But it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me as to why anyone would want to look into something that was created by something that might not be able to dream. Or maybe it does, who knows? I don't know. This part is kind of hard because I mean, there's really no way for me to convince you that like this aesthetic reason is the reason why you shouldn't buy AI generated tarot decks. It's just so subjective, right? Just because I don't find it to be aesthetically pleasing doesn't mean you won't. And so that's kind of the question that I keep running into when I keep doing these takes. I want to think of us as wanting something a little bit more substantial, something a little less empty, even if it is for shadow work or dream work, because your dreams aren't empty, right? I wouldn't think that your shadow is empty either. Maybe it's just trying to create something from nothing. That's maybe a perfectly viable reason to enjoy the artwork in this deck. I don't really appreciate how ethereal it is though. I think it's ethereal in the way that's inhuman, which obviously that's the selling point. It's that it's not supposed to be something that's human made. It's supposed to be something where maybe like some cyber witch wants to merge themselves into this experience of technology and the AI. That's just my guess though. I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of somebody who would really enjoy this kind of deck, and it's a little difficult to do so because to me, I think AI generated tarot decks are more of a novelty, and I don't necessarily see them as usable for what I tend to use tarot decks for. Like for dreams, for example, if I can get a little personal, in my practice, I have a tendency to just draw the spaces that I occupy in my dreams, especially because they tend to be really consistent, like recurring places that I go to. or if it has anything to do with maybe my emotions. If I'm feeling a certain something in my dreams and it was strong enough for me to remember when by the time I wake up, then perhaps I'll write it down. It's not every day that I'll use a tarot deck for it, but if I'm struggling with finding what those feelings I was trying to express, a tarot deck is a very useful tool for that. I do have something for that. Yes, I don't see myself really using, yeah, I mean, basically, like, just because the aesthetics, I don't see them as usable products for me. I think the creativity that originates from the human mind is a lot more fascinating and much more relatable to what I'm interested in accomplishing in a tarot reading, whether it be for dreams or shadow work or anything. I guess in a way, I'm trying to think of how to say this. It's silly to say that this is a weird thing, but in a weird way, I think human-made tarot decks just offer, just knowing that it was created from emotion and experience and knowledge, for a tarot deck to have that background and context, it just makes it a much more authentic experience than anything that AI generated tarot decks could ever offer. If I was told that, like, let's say I already had like a really good relationship with some sort of oracle, like let's say the Angelarium that I'll show you a little bit more later. If I were to find out that Peter Moorbacher like did all of his illustrations by just doing AI generated ones, that would absolutely change my perspective on how I view this deck, because suddenly all of that potential knowledge and experience and emotion that I thought was put into such an rightfully ethereal deck like this one, like that would just kind of go out the window. And it would in some ways cheapen a lot of the experiences that I had with it. And I know that that's just like super, like maybe shallow, I don't know. But yeah, I would feel maybe a tad violated by that. I think it's just worth noting that it takes years for an artist to discover the style that they have, and even more to create 78 images for a single deck. I want to acknowledge and reward that. I sincerely believe that you can miss out on those intentional details that only a person can create for the joy and cohesion of the entire image. A bazillion years ago, I went to a talk that my university was hosting that was on game design. They had 4 designers on the panel. One of them, I believe, was a designer for Diablo, I want to say it was Diablo 3, maybe 2. A designer for Diablo. And he shared with us just the most like touching and inspiring fun fact that I had ever heard at that time, and it's been coming up in my brain more and more as I ponder these AI generated tarot decks. So he shows us this image, like just this image of the game, right? And he points to like this little water spout and he says, I'm gonna need my script for this one actually, because I was paraphrasing, but the way that I wrote it, I still wanted to share with you guys. You see that little pixelated water spout in the corner of the frame? It's dripping water. A human had to design and code for that to happen. With no human, that doesn't happen. And I think that's just so incredible. Like every line of code might have been made by a person. Everything that was designed for a specific game that had to have a person behind someone making that. And I just think that's absolutely like insane to me, like in the best ways possible. Anyways, so let's go ahead and head down to the study space. I want to show you guys some of the decks that I would use in place of something that would be AI generated, based on what we might know that AI generated art tends to be sought after for. So let's take a look. Alrighty folks, welcome down to the study space. Apologies if this cloth is a little too much. This isn't the first time that I've used it in a video, but it's the only good one that I have, I feel like. But at any rate, I'm trying to think of what order I wanted to show you guys these decks, because I definitely want to categorize these to a certain extent. And I guess a good place to start would be for me to take into consideration what is it that people are lured in with AI decks? Like what makes AI generated art so alluring? And the first thing that I think of is, I mean, of course, dreamlike, right? So I'll go ahead and show you Terra the Sweet Twilight. This is a Los Scarabeo joint. My copy, however, is trimmed and it is edged. And so this deck definitely fits the bill for the more surreal type. And I guess that's another indicator for what people tend to enjoy about AI generated art, is that it's usually surreal. And this deck is absolutely that. Like if Salvador Dali had an emo girl phase. But this deck definitely makes for really good dream work, in my experience. It does definitely help me figure out the best way to express myself and the way that I feel after having a dream that was so impactful that I was able to remember it. Or sometimes if there was a dream that I only remembered parts of it and I really wanted to fish out additional details, and this makes a good deck, like, to be able to do that with. So Terra the Sweet Twilight is definitely a contender, and I also highly recommend you chop off the enormous borders if you are able to do so. In the same vein of dreamlike, I would also put the Interim Tarot in that same category. Move the box away. I'm trying to find the artist's name while I'm at it. I know for sure this is gifted to me by a dear friend, Linda Benjamin. So the Interim Tarot by Linda Benjamin. So even though this one is totally monochrome, there's like an immense amount of detail in this. And what I really appreciate is the author's like just that theme of interim. Like I think it's specifically supposed to be for just being in that in-between, very liminal, right? And I do think that this deck, as opposed to Tarot of the Sweet Twilight, I feel like this one is definitely more sorry, my cat is like rummaging somewhere. Anyways, I feel like this deck is more of a deck that you would probably want to meditate on, because there's so much going on in each of the card. And I mean, it's so wacky, and sometimes it can be a little goofy, but sometimes like that's how dreams are, where in the moment when you're dreaming, things feel so serious and you're so invested in what happens next. But you know, you wake up and you want so badly to write about your dream or draw it or something like that. And sometimes you might feel in retrospect, wow, that was really stupid that I thought that this dream was that important, or that it was, you know, that serious. But I think that this deck helps to bring a little bit of legitimacy to validating your dreams, and I 100% just appreciate that. I think the next category that I would maybe use to describe AI art, or at least what excites people about AI art, is its etherealness, which you've already heard me say before, but the first deck that came to mind was Angelarium, Oracle of Emanations by Peter Moorbacher. This is a slightly bigger deck. Let's see how this looks on camera. Oh, that works. Okay, great. So this is one of the few angel decks that I own. I typically don't like angel decks, but I mean, this one obviously needs to be in my collection. This deck is, how do I even describe this deck? It's just a lot. I would probably say that these are biblically correct looking angels, or maybe it's just Peter Moorbacher taking advantage of the fact that a biblically correct angel doesn't look like what we're used to them looking like in your standard angel deck. And so he just kind of goes all out. Like, these are ethereal beings of awesome power. And this deck also, like, for any of you guys who are into like the Kabbalah Tree of Life type stuff, like, as you can see, this deck is like all about that. There's a little bit more in the guidebook. I remember reading the guidebook like a long time ago. I really should have reviewed it for this video, but maybe that'll be for another time. This deck was actually almost in my purgatory box because I just didn't really use it much. But once the AI tarot decks started making their rounds, and I found myself being like interested in them at first, but then when finding out that they were AI generated, I was just instantaneously disappointed. It made me miss the immense work that Peter Moorbacher puts in his ethereal creations. And so yeah, this would be a great oracle to pick up if, I mean, number one, you're into oracles, and number two, if you just like the fantastical imagery that comes with each angel that he depicts. And in the same vein of ethereal, Earthly Souls and Spirits Moon Oracle by Terry Foss would also go into this category. I have the mass market edition. I believe the indie edition, which is out of print, they typically have, I think they have different backs, and they're a lot bigger. This one, however, is a lot smaller because I have trimmed the bottoms. Typically, the mass market edition, really all of the editions will have a keyword at the bottom, but I personally felt that the keywords were a little distracting and not entirely accurate to what I was seeing in the cards. And sometimes, onto the subject of AI generated art, you'll often see these very, floaty, almost ghost-like imagery that I think is conveyed a lot better with Terry Foss's art. And since I have cut the keywords off, to me, that this provides like a way more, just a better practice for me to exercise reading intuitively. I haven't decided if I wanted to add in my own keywords just yet, but if I do, I'll let you know, because I anticipate that being a very big project. And the third and last category that I would probably categorize AI art in terms of its marketability, I guess, would be kind of dark, right? Yeah, kind of dark. I don't think I've seen one bright AI generated tarot deck that I can remember. Okay, so then this deck fits perfectly fine. This is the Tarot Restless 3rd edition by Winslow Dumaine, who also spoke a little bit about AI art himself, which of course I will link in the description. I'm trying to to really pinpoint why I picked this deck for a really good alternative over AI art. And it just kind of came to me, to be honest, whenever I would see some of the decks be marketed on, you know, the tarot marketplace or on Kickstarter or even on Etsy. I don't know why, but I instinctively think of this deck. I know that a lot of people really like AI art for shadow work, and I think this deck works really well for that. Not just because it's dark and gloomy and scary, but because it does prompt you to think more about the more, I guess, negative aspects of your own self. Because at the end of the day, like if you caught my video on the Tarot Restless, like this deck is almost simultaneously a novel, and almost everything that could go bad kind of goes bad in this world, and it's important to be willing to face that. And I don't think AI generated art or AI in general is intuitive enough to be able to replicate those kinds of feelings. And as I'm kind of saying this out loud, I am recognizing that that might be what that empty feeling is when you do look at AI generated art, especially a tarot deck. I think one might be fostering more empty feelings, although I don't know that by experience. If you have an AI generated art, or an AI generated art, if you have an AI generated tarot deck that you've worked with, no judgment. I am genuinely curious about your experience in working with it, because I just think that something more human made can make for more fulfilling experiences in delving into that shadow self. So here are some honorable mentions. These are tarot decks that I don't have in my collection or no longer have in my collection, that would still make really good alternatives over AI art. And so the first one is a deck for Wonder Walking by Amy Wan. I believe this one is getting a reprint through another Kickstarter campaign, so I'll make sure I link at least her Instagram, because I think she's announcing it there, in the description below. And this deck is generally for travel, not like long distance travel, but like hiking. I don't know what the outdoors looks like, so that's partially why it didn't stay in my collection. But it might actually make a really good alternative for anybody who's interested in like dream work, because that deck, if I remember correctly, does have a lot of really thought-provoking imagery that almost sucks you into that place. And I do really think that decks that focus on more place and less what's going on in the cards can be really, really fun to work with. The second deck that I wanted to mention was, it was actually a deck that I discovered in between takes, and it is a tarot deck of liminal spaces. I thought that was great. And lo and behold, like each of the suits represents like different types of liminal spaces, like back rooms. I think there was one, it was, oh crap, I've immediately forgotten what it was, but I was instantly intrigued, so it might go on my wish list. That one is available on Etsy, and it seems to be pretty affordable. So yeah, if I ever get it, maybe I'll show it on the channel, but in the meantime, you can look at it. And of course, if you have any ideas or any tarot decks that you think are really excellent alternatives for AI generated tarot decks, definitely let us know in the comments, so we can have a kind of archive, for lack of a better term, on just alternatives, because it's no joke that these decks are getting a lot of popularity, but it just can't continue on like this, at least not in the way that it's going now. So, I guess with that said, thank you so much for hearing me out if you've stuck with me this far. I feel like artists have always just been the victim of something, and I feel like this has been a particularly difficult year for them. I've listed a playlist from art YouTuber Cat Grapham in the description as well, for Cat's series Artists Beware, on the many challenges, scams, and obstacles faced by artists. If you're interested about learning more about AI art in general, Kat's video on the matter is included in that playlist. For the context of tarot, I've linked other videos that I've seen on AI art in tarot, and all that I really ask in exploring viewpoints, these different viewpoints, is that you make discourse and not war. Until next time, folks. Bye.